Welcome back, everyone. Dan Vega here, and today we are talking about HTTP interface clients in Spring Framework 6, Spring Boot 3. So I've done a lot of content on this recently. I created a What's New in Spring Boot 3 video a while back, which I will go ahead and link here and in the description below. I've also done some videos on HTTP interfaces, some of the features. I've been talking a lot about it on the road lately, but I haven't really gone deep into it and start to explore some more kind of complete examples, if you will. That's what I want to do today. I want to create a full REST API in Spring MVC. If you want to skip that part, some timestamps will be in the description below. But what we'll do is we'll create a Maven multi-module project. We'll create that REST API, and then we'll create a new service to consume that API using Spring's HTTP interfaces. So a lot of the examples I've shown have just kind of shown one method, like a find all method to get a list of things. We'll explore how to create all these different methods in our interface. We'll create one to find all, to get a particular record, all the CRUD stuff that you would expect to see. So with that, let's go ahead and write some code. All right, so normally we kick all our projects off by heading over to start.spring.io. I'm going to actually start in IntelliJ IDEA today. Now, again, I always use to encourage everyone to use whatever IDEs or editors that you're most productive in. There's a way to do this in whatever IDE text editor you're using. I'm just going to kind of show it off how to do it in IntelliJ. At the end of the day, what we're going to do is create a Maven multi-module project. So we're basically creating an empty Maven project, and then we're adding some submodules to it. We're not even going that far, though, because I'm not using this to check in anywhere and have it actually build. I'm going to actually start both services up within IntelliJ using the services panel, which is an Ultimate Edition feature. So if you're using the Community Edition, that may not show up. But again, at the end of the day, they're just two services. You could easily go into both directories and just start up the service if you wanted to. So with that kind of lay of the land, let's go ahead and create this project. So I'm going to use the empty project. You could go into Maven, but I just need an empty Maven project. I don't need Maven. I don't need to do anything in that empty project. So here in my downloads, I'm going to go ahead and create something called HTTP interfaces. We're going to choose Java and Maven. We're going to use Java 17. I don't need any sample code, and we'll just have a group ID of dev.danvega. So let's go ahead and hit create, and then I'll go ahead and make this a little bit bigger. And here we go. So we do get some extra stuff in here. So you have source main test in the final code, which is going to be on GitHub. You can go ahead and check out that link in the description below. I'm probably delete like the source folder and just kind of add a README and clean some of this up. But this is a good start. So once you have your kind of empty Maven project, what we can do here is right click and we can say new and we could say module. And then this module is going to be what we are adding to this project. So what I'm going to do is basically create, let's kind of push this out a little. I'm going to create two different services here. I'm going to create an article service. So you can think of like blog posts. I've been using that a lot lately, so I'm just going to kind of stick with it. But an article service, maybe we have this like content delivery network and we have a separate service for different pieces of content. So I'm going to have an article service, which stores and serves up articles. Then maybe I'll have like a content service, which will go out to the different services to kind of fetch all of that information. So let's start with the article service. This is going to be a Spring Initializer project. We're going to call this our articles service. It's in our HTTP interfaces project. We're going to use Java. We're going to use Maven. We'll save dev.danvega. Again, we're using SDK 17 here. And what do I need inside of my articles service? Really, this is just going to be a web API. So I think that's really all I need for now. So I'm going to go ahead and create that. Okay, so we have our articles service here. I'm going to create one more module. And we'll say new module, and we'll call this our content service, maybe our content hub. This is going to be Java, Maven, dev.danvega. There's our content service. We're using 17. And over here, I'm going to choose web and reactive web. So if you've seen me kind of cover anything with HTTP interfaces, underneath the hood, they are using the reactive web client, but it can be both for blocking calls and non-blocking calls. We'll talk more about that as we're going, but I need both of those because I'm actually building out an API in my content hub. And when you hit that API, we end up routing that call over to our articles service to kind of fetch that information or persist it, if you will. So those are my two services. That's going to really be the kind of foundation for what we're going to build here today. You'll see in IntelliJ, when it sees multiple services, it says, hey, I have this really great feature for managing multiple services. Do you want to use it? And yes, I do. So that gives us this nice feature here where it's going to say, hey, I see two things there. I can go ahead and start and stop these from here. If you have a whole bunch of services, this is really a must-have. It's really hard to do without this, so definitely check this out if you haven't seen it before. So that's the foundation. Let's go ahead and get things started by creating the REST API in the articles service. All right, so we're going to start here in our articles service. We're going to go under source, main, Java, and here. This is our service. I'm going to go ahead and start by creating a new Java class in the model package, and we're going to call this article. This is going to be a record, and this is just going to be a way to represent an article in our system. So I'm going to use an integer ID, a string title, and a string for the body. So that's it. That's our article. We can represent that throughout our system. So I'm going to create a new class now, and we are going to create a Java class in the controller package, and we'll call this article controller. So here we're going to create a new REST API. So I'm going to create a REST controller with a request mapping of /API/articles. And you'll notice that at the beginning of this, we didn't bring in anything to do with databases. We didn't bring in an H2 database. We didn't bring anything like Spring Data. I'm just going to store this in memory just to keep this article a little bit concise. So we're going to say private final list of articles. So article, we'll call this articles, and we'll just go ahead and create a new array list, and that's it. So once that's in place, now I can go ahead and I need to create a method that I can go ahead and initialize some data. So I'm going to just create one article, but you can create as many as you'd like. So I'm going to use the post construct here. This method is going to be private void init, and this will just get called after this controller is created. So we'll go ahead and be able to initialize our articles list. So I'm going to say, let's say article is equal to new article, and we'll pass in an ID, we'll pass in a title, maybe hello world, and then we'll pass in a body. This is my first blog post, right? So once that's there, we can say articles is equal to our articles.add, and we're going to go ahead and add this article. So that's that. We now have at least one article in there. So now we need a way to kind of retrieve that information. Well, we need all of the CRUD methods, right? So let's go ahead and build out our REST API. So first we'll need a get mapping. This is for kind of finding all the articles. So we'll say public list article find all, and what this is going to do is just return our articles, and that is that. So that really is all we need to do for that method. Next up, we may have a get mapping for /articles/ID. So the ID being a dynamic variable, we can return, I'm going to return an optional, you'll see why in a second, of article. And we'll just call this find by ID. This is going to take in that path variable. We're going to turn this into an integer. And the way that we get this is we're just going to return articles.stream. So we're going to stream this. We're going to filter on this. And then we're going to say, hey, from that article, I want you to get the ID. And I want you to see if it's equal to the ID that I passed in. Okay, so that's going to basically return that. And then what we want to do is we want to find first, and now that will return an optional. That's why we decided to make the return type an optional of article. Okay, so we've got our kind of read methods, a way to get them all and a way to get a single one. Next, we need a way to create an article. So this is going to be a post mapping. We will say public void, they'll call this create. This is going to take in a request body, so the JSON of the article to create. We'll call this article. And then what we'll go ahead and do is we will just say this. Actually, we don't even need that. We'll just say articles dot add, and then we'll add the article that gets created. Now, in a real world scenario, I would probably do some validation there, but this is just a quick example. So we also want to go ahead and be a nice representation of an API here and return a responsible status code. So I just want to say, hey, if you get one created, we're going to go ahead and return the HTTP status.created code. So that's a good start so far. So we have find my ID, post mapping for creating. We need an updated and a deleted, and that should give us kind of our CRUD functionality. So next I'll use a put mapping, and I will say the similar thing. I will say /ID. So I want to update that particular one. I also want to set a response status of not created. So no content. That's what I wanted. And this will again be void. We'll call this update. This is going to take in what? We are going to take in the article. So similar request body, article, and then we'll take in the ID. Which is from the path variable, so integer ID. And then what we want to do is return, how can we do this? So I want to get the article that's coming in is the one we're going to update. We want to get the current article so that I can basically, if the current article, based on the ID. So I want to check the ID, look for the current article, and then basically from that, if that exists, I can get the index and then replace that one. So let's see, articles.stream. I got to find that one first. So I'm going to filter by a.id dot equals. So if that equals the ID, something that we did similar above, dot find first. So if we get that, right, let me just create a var from that. So let's say that this is an existing article, right? So now what I can do is I can say, let me call it current, because it may not exist. So now what I can say is current article, if present. So that, because we're returning an optional, basically if present allows us to say, hey, if we call get on it, it's going to be there, right? So now we can say if present, let me get the value of that, and I can say articles dot set. Now I need to know the index, so I can say articles dot index of, and then basically what we found. So we know we found that object, so that is the index, and then what I want to replace that with is the article that I got passed in. So I think that will work. Finally, a delete mapping, again, /ID. And a response status of no content. Great. So we need a delete, and this will take in the path variable for integer ID. And then all we're going to do for this one is articles.remove if. Again, we don't want to remove it if it doesn't exist. So we'll say a.id. Whoops. ID equals the ID. Okay. So I think that's good. I think that is the crux of our kind of CRUD REST API. Now we need a way to test this. And this is where there's a feature in IntelliJ that I really love, and that is the ability to call HTTP services. But more importantly, I can drop a file in here just for you so that you can pull this down from the GitHub repository. I'm going to call this articles.http. So the suffix is important there, the .http. Now I have all these kind of like quick tests that I can run. I hate using the word test, manually testing these endpoints, right? These aren't tests that we have written. These are just a way for us to manually test it the way that we would in a curl, on a command line, in a Postman, however we like to test our APIs. So now that that is going, now I can go down to my services. So the articles service application, I think there's going to be one more change I'm going to make. I'm going to go ahead into application.properties. Both of these can't run on 8080. So I'm going to set a server.port equal to 8081. Okay. Now with that in place, I'm not going to start both of them. I'm just going to start my articles service application. Okay. And now that is running. So now we should be able to run a get on localhost 8081/API/articles. And we should be able to see that. So if we click on this, we see our one article. We should be able to get one. And we can see that we get one. We should be able to create a new one. So I'm creating a second article. So I send that. I get a 201. So we created a new article. And if you wanted to check that, you can just run the find all again and see all of the articles there. So you can go through and test each one of these by hand if you want, but these should work. And now that this is a file in the Git repository, you can just kind of pull this down yourself. Cool. So that is kind of section one, creating the REST API on the article service. And next, what we'll do is we'll create a client using these HTTP interface clients on the content service to go out and reach out to our article service for that information. All right, so I'm gonna head into my content service under source, main, Java. I'm going to create a new package. Let's call this service. And under service, I'm going to create a new class. Let's call this class the article client. Now, I know one thing that confused me is the word client is like, okay, wait, is that the browser? You know, I think the word client is thrown around a lot and it's a little bit confusing at times. In this case, a client is just, I am responsible for calling the other service. So in this case, I am the client. It doesn't necessarily mean like a browser-based client. This is the client. So I'm saying article client because this is going to be responsible for the calling of the article service somewhere else. So this is going to be an interface. So in the past, again, you could have created a service. We could create an article service, and we could use something like a REST template or a web client, and that would be used to call out to the service that we created before. But the problem with that is you have to write a lot of low-level code to make that work. And it's a lot of repetitive code that you really don't need to write. All you need to do is tell us, hey, this is the service I got to call. This is what I expect to get back. Here are some other things about it, and we'll turn that into an implementation for you at runtime. So let's look at how this works. So we have this interface. We need to basically say, we need to define kind of the boilerplate, the foundation for this article client, right? The way that we're going to do this is I'm going to create a new class. I'm going to call this my, let's see, client. Let's put this in a config package, and I'm going to call this client config. And this is going to be a class. I'm going to mark this with at configuration. And now I'm going to go create a new bean. And what we'll do is we'll say, hey, at the end of the day, I want to get an article client back. I'll call this article client. And here's where the little bit of configuration comes into play. Again, I've talked about this in the past. I've talked about this on the road. I'd hope to see that in the future we can kind of cut down on this part. I often have a IntelliJ IDEA live template that I use for this just because I don't remember it. So I kind of pull this stuff in. But again, it's just a little bit of boilerplate code that you'll need to write to make this work. So we say that we need a web client. Actually, I don't know why my formatting's off here. Web client. So again, this is why we brought in the WebFlux package. So we're saying this is a client, and we're going to use the web client.builder. And from there, we're going to set a base URL. So this is the base URL of the service that we're going to be calling. In our case, this is going to be localhost 8081/API. Because again, remember to find all, it's /API/articles. To find one, it's /API/articles/1. So this is the base URL that is going to be consistent throughout. And then finally, we'll go ahead and call build and return that client. With the client, we're going to use an HTTP service proxy factory. And we're going to say, I want to go ahead and use a builder. So from the builder, we're going to say web client adapter .for client, and then we're going to pass the client in there. And then we're going to call build on that. So let's actually create a var from there, and we'll call this the factory, and that should be that. Nope. So let's say factory. Cool. And then all we want to do from that is now return the factory.create client. So now we're creating a client. What are we creating a client from? The article client that we've defined, that interface, right? So this little bit of boilerplate now has it's a configuration class, it's a bean definition. This means this will go into the application context. We can ask for this article client in whatever class we want. We could be in some command line runner, we could be in a controller, we could be in a service. We could say, hey, give me that article client, call the find all method, and then you handle writing all of that low-level code that will call that service for me and get back what I expect to get back, right? So that's the boilerplate. Now let's go back to the article client. So I know that in my article service, I have a method called find all. I want to call that, right? So it's the base URL, so localhost 8081/API/articles. So now over here, I can know that I need to write some type of method to contact /articles. We know that that's a get method. So there's a get exchange annotation. So there's an HTTP exchange method, which is kind of like the top level one. And then these specialized versions of this. So in this case, it's get exchange. What after the base URL are we going to call? What's the URI? In this case, it's just /articles. Here's where it gets fun. Now, what the return type defined here is going to signify to the web client is, will this be a blocking call or a non-blocking call? If you wanted it to be a non-blocking call and you wanted to get a flux of articles, so you could do that. Or you can just, in this case, say, I want to create a list of articles. And in this case, that will be a blocking call. Now you see we don't have articles. Let's go ahead and copy this from before. So I'm going to copy and paste into here just our article record, and that way that will get resolved. So now we're saying, hey, a list of articles, I'm going to call this find all, and that's all I need to write is the method stub. I don't need to write the implementation, right? So that is the really nice thing about this. We're writing just kind of the stub. We're not writing the implementation. So now we should be able to go down the line and watch this work. So let's say we want to get one. So this is going to be a get exchange to /articles/ID. So we'll call this if you remember back from the article service, we're going to get an optional of article back from that. So that is what the return type can be. We'll call it find one, and this is going to use the path variable, and this is an ID. So again, not writing the implementation, just writing out the method signature. Next, we'll use a post exchange. So we want a post exchange to /articles. Again, this is off the base URL. We'll say the return type is void. We're going to call create. This is a request body. We want an article as an argument to this. Again, that's it. Void update. We need that to be a put exchange to /articles/ID. So we'll call this update. In update, again, we'll take our request body. We'll call this article, and this will also take the path variable integer ID. And finally, we need a delete exchange. So delete exchange to /articles/ID. Again, we'll say this is void delete, and this is going to take the path variable integer ID. So there we go. So we wrote a client that is capable of talking to another service. We've stubbed out all the methods that we care about. So now what we can do is wherever we want to use this article client, we can do so. We can say, hey, article client find all. And when we find all, it's going to basically turn this into an implementation at runtime. And that find all will call our article service to call the find all method over there, because it's basically the endpoint that it cares about, right? So let's see if we can get this to work. To get this to work in my content service, I'm going to create a new Java class. We'll call this a controller, and we'll call this a content controller. All right, this is going to be a REST controller. This is going to be a request mapping of /API/content. Now here's where it gets fun. I need that article client in my controller here to make a call over to that service. So what I'll do is I'll say public final article client. We'll call it article client. And now we'll go ahead and get that through constructor injection. And now we have an instance of the article client. So let's say that I had a get mapping for /API/content/articles, and I wanted to get all of the articles in that downstream system. What I can do is I can say public list of articles, and I can say find all, let's say articles, in case we had other pieces of content in here. And all I can do now is say return whatever the article client's find all method returns. And we know that based on that signature, that is going to return a list of articles. Cool. So let's see if that works so far, and then we'll kind of finish this off. So now what I like to do is come in here, and in my services, I want to go ahead and rerun everything. I want to have both the article service and the content service started. So now I should be able to go to localhost 8080/API/content/articles. So let's head over to the browser and try that. And there we go. There is our one article. And again, we are pulling that from downstream. And the way that we did that is by our service calling that service. But again, we didn't write that low-level implementation code to call that service. Okay, so far so good. Let's go ahead and round out the rest of the methods in here. To do so, I'm going to go ahead and just paste some code. Again, nothing interesting here. We wrote a lot of the same code in the last REST API. So I have one to find by ID. So I call the article client find one. I call the article client create, update, and delete. So that's all there is there. If you want to go ahead and test this, I'll drop another file in here called content.http. So this is going to call out to say localhost 8080/API/content/articles and then an ID. This is just for testing all of them. But that's really all there is to it. We have our content service. In our content service, we created a little bit of configuration to wire up that client. We created a new article client, which is really just an interface with no implementation details. Again, Spring will turn that into an implementation at runtime, so you don't have to write those kind of boring details. And we'll talk to our article service, which in this case we created as a REST API. So I hope this was a little bit more information, kind of shed a little bit more light on why we're using HTTP interface clients here, what the word client means. I hope you're a little bit excited about this. I am. This helps me cut down on code, lets me kind of focus on more important things, or things that I care about, I should say. Maybe not important, but things that I care about more. So yeah, I'm excited about this feature. I've gotten a lot of questions about some other details on exceptions and how this compares to Feign, and a whole bunch of questions that you guys seem to have. And so I've heard them. We will try to get those as they come in, and I'll create some more content around that. So let me know if you're using HTTP interfaces in Spring Framework 6, Spring Boot 3. If you are, great, leave that below. If you just started jumping into them and you have questions about that, do me a favor and leave those questions. We'll start to try and get those answered. As always, friends, I hope you found a lot of value out of this video. If you did, do me a big favor, leave me a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel, and as always, happy coding.